Hi, I'm Sandra Paulson. I've been working with EMDR for a quarter century, also teaching all over the world and publishing books and book chapters about advanced procedures with EMDR for a couple decades. Today, I want to speak about the use of EMDR in conjunction with other treatments for OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. The treatment of choice, according to the research for obsessive compulsive disorder, has been exposure and response prevention, also called exposure and ritual prevention, for some decades. It's a manualized procedure, and I was trained in it in the 80s. Actually, before I learned EMDR and was treating OCD with that procedure. I also found that using ego state work, the work of Jack and Helen Watkins, and I had the privilege of collaborating with John G. Watkins before his death, that ego state therapy was helpful because OCD often relates to developmental trauma in childhood where and I'm not saying this is always the case, but I've seen it often that there's a child ego state developmentally arrested at a time of magical thinking. Remember, step on a crack, you'll break your mother's back. That kind of reasoning is very typical for OCD, as if that magical thinking gets enshrined in like a mosquito in amber in the client's mind as a way to manage anxiety. So I'll just say a few brief things about first OCD and then exposure and ritual prevention, and then its combination with EMDR and ego state therapy. So it's complex, and I don't think I ever do it exactly the same way every time, but OCD is a disabling disorder where, according to the DSM, if a person spends more than an hour a day engaging in compulsive rituals, it's disabling, and then they're diagnosable with OCD. So, and some people can't leave their house because they're so busy washing hands or checking the stove or scrubbing this or that or counting things. I mean, there's myriad forms of OCD. I guess I could go into that on another video, but the basic psychological element of it is that there's an unwanted thought that it's horrific to the client or just unwanted that comes into mind that makes their anxiety go up. For example, did I run over somebody? Or am I contaminated with germs? Or did I leave the stove on? I'm going to burn the apartment building down and kill people. Those kinds of thoughts. So there's a unwanted anxiety-producing thought. Anxiety skyrockets, but if the person engages in the compulsive behavior, it causes the anxiety to go down. So it sounds like a good idea because they get relief. And the relief is reinforcing. That is, next time that same thought comes to their mind, the anxiety goes up again, so they're more likely to use the same thing that lowered their anxiety last time, no matter how ritualistic or magical it may appear to be. So, and that happens over and over and over. So it's the avoidance of the horrific thought by engaging in the ritual behavior, the ritual response. It's not always a ritual, it's a behavior or a response that causes the anxiety to go down, and that is reinforcing, and that's what increases the amount of time the person spends doing it, because since they're avoiding what makes them anxious, they have to keep doing the ritual more and more and more and more. So the solution is the last thing that the OCD client wants to do, and that's why informed consent is a very important part of the treatment with exposure and response prevention, which is also called ritual prevention. A therapist can't just do it to a client. The client has to be on board, has to understand it, because what's going to happen is the client is going to be exposed, for example, on a loop tape or MP3 or 4 or something, exposed to their most horrid thought, which the therapist kindly records on the tape. in its most exaggerated form, and you're dying a slow, lingering death of contamination, et cetera, really ham it up. You can see why you need consent for this. And that loop tape plays over and over. And of course, at first, it makes the client's anxiety skyrocket through the roof. But eventually, through extinction, it will come down. And that's the, but the client also has to be prevented from engaging in the ritual. So they have to agree ahead of time. They're not going to get up, go wash their hands, or go line up pencils in a straight row, or whatever ritual they engage in to lower their anxiety. It's much easier for hand washing because you can tell if they're leaving the room to wash their hands. What's hard is to prevent somebody from saying a silent prayer. So for those people whose rituals are entirely cognitive, it's much harder to prevent. They have to be willing to not do it. And if they were able to not do it, they wouldn't be doing it in the first place. So those are the hardest ones. But exposure to the warded off thought, the horrific thought, the unwanted thought, while being prevented from engaging in the ritual or response, is the treatment. And yes, it's unpleasant, but you need 90-minute sessions, and often not with exposure and response prevention. Typically, they need 12 or 16 sessions or more to get the anxiety down through exposure, through the natural process of extinction. Now, where does EMDR come in here? I like to add EMDR or bilateral stim in here, and really it can be worked up within the 8 phases of EMDR, but the bilateral stim is added as part of the desensitization or the exposure treatment. While the response is being prevented, we add bilateral stim, and in my experience, it really facilitates the disturbance level coming down more rapidly, so it's kinder. Where does ego state therapy come in? Well, as I said, often these things seem to be sequestered child ego states that are engaging in magical thinking. And so I like to work directly with those child ego states, interviewing them, making sure they're oriented in time, but also working with any of what I call the honchos, the introjects or other parts of self powerful enough to derail the work, because there are often introjects in there scolding and interfering. So I'll go over that at length in a 2-day workshop, which I'm doing for the first time in 2017 in Phoenix in the fall, October. And Lori Tetrol is the contact person for that. That'll be on my website as well at bainbridgepsychology.com. Thanks so much for your interest. Bye-bye now.